This is a model Think-Aloud of a passage on pages 71 and 72 in the novel Their Eyes Were Watching God, in chapter 6. So go ahead and open up your books, please, to page 71, and find the passage that starts, "She wasn't petal open anymore with him." And what I'm going to do is, after Ruby Dee's narration of the passages, I'm going to walk you through a model Think-Aloud of what an experienced reader might pick up on in this passage, and then give you the opportunity to put the pieces together. So as I'm going through the Think-Aloud, make sure that you're marking up your novel accordingly. Okay, go ahead and find that passage, and here we go.
She wasn't petal open anymore with him. She was 24 and 7 years married when she knew. She found that out one day when he slapped her face in the kitchen. It happened over one of those dinners that chasten all women sometimes. They plan and they fix and they do, and then some kitchen-dwelling fiend slips a scorchy, soggy, tasteless mess into their pots and pans. Janie was a good cook, and Joe had looked forward to his dinner as a refuge from other things. So when the bread didn't rise and the fish wasn't quite done at the bone and the rice was scorched, he slapped Janie until she had a ringing sound in her ears and told her about her brains before he stalked on back to the store. Janie stood where he left her for unmeasured time and thought. She stood there until something fell off the shelf inside her. Then she went inside there to see what it was. It was her image of Jody, tumbled down and shattered. But looking at it, she saw that it never was the flesh and blood figure of her dreams, just something she had grabbed up to drape her dreams over. In a way, she turned her back upon the image where it lay and looked further. She had no more blossomy openings dusting pollen over her man, neither any glistening young fruit where the petals used to be. She found that she had a host of thoughts she had never expressed to him, and numerous emotions she had never let Jody know about, things packed up and put away in parts of her heart where he could never find them. She was saving up feelings for some man she had never seen. She had an inside and an outside now, and suddenly she knew how not to mix them.
Okay, so that's the passage. You can mark the end of that section there. Let's make sure that we are on the same page with plot before we actually move forward. So in this scene, we know that Janie is, 24 years old and has been married for 7 years. And it seems like something happens here that triggers a shift in her, that she's no longer happy, that she realizes that she's not happy, and that she's not being honest with Jody, that she's got feelings that she's never expressed to him, emotions that he would never find out about, and that she was saving up her feelings either for herself or for some other man. Now, the first thing that I'm thinking about is, we know from the opening chapter that there's some dude named Tea Cake. So I wonder if he's a part of this scene, but we're not sure. I wonder if he's some other man that she's never seen. And then the next thing that I want to make sure is that I understand all the vocabulary, because I saw a couple of words in there that were kind of unfamiliar. So I saw chasten and refuge. I had to look those up. Chasten is a verb. It means to cause someone to feel sad or embarrassed, or to correct someone with punishment. So dinner was something that chastened women at all times. This process of making dinner could make a woman feel embarrassed or feel punished. And that Joe had looked forward to his dinner as a refuge, or as a place that provides shelter, protection. It was a sanctuary from the rest of his day. Okay, so I think I understand the text. I think that I get a sense of the plot. So let's start to peel away the layers of the subtext. Remember, the subtext is the stuff that sort of undergirds the plot level. It's almost like peeling away layers of an onion. You've got the plot on the outside that we see at the surface, but that's not all that's there. Underneath the plot, there's layers of symbols and motifs, imagery and characterization, all leading us to that core, to the deeper meaning. So let me show you what I see in this passage. The first thing that I notice is characterization of Janie's role in Joe's world. So take a look at what I've marked out in orange here. He slapped her face in the kitchen. It happened over one of those dinners that chasten all women sometimes. They plan and they fix and they do, and then some kitchen-dwelling fiend slips a scorchy, soggy, tasteless mess into their pots and pans. Janie was a good cook, and Joe had looked forward to his dinner as a refuge from other things. So when the bread didn't rise, and the fish wasn't quite done at the bone, and the rice was scorched, he slapped Janie until she had a ringing in her ears and told her about her brains before he stalked on back to the store. Okay, wow, there's a lot going on here. The first thing that I'm thinking about is, what is Janie's role? She's in the kitchen. She's trying to make a meal, and it's like some kitchen-dwelling fiend, some kitchen devil, has slipped something nasty into her pots and pans. And even though Janie's a good cook, and Joe's always looked forward to dinner, she makes this mistake this one night. Nothing goes right. The bread doesn't rise, the fish isn't done, the rice is scorched, and as a result, Joe slaps her. Okay, well, we've all made mistakes before, so this seems like a pretty outlandish response, and a brutal one at that. It makes me think actually back to chapter 5, to Joe's speech. Remember when the townspeople, this is on page 43 if you're curious, the townspeople say, let's hear a few words of encouragement from Mrs. Mayor Starks. And then before Janie even gets to talk, Joe comes in and says, my wife don't know nothing about no speech making. I never married her for nothing like that. She's a woman and her place is in the home. It's made me think about that Janie is in the home. She's caring for Joe's burdens. She's caring for Jody, working to carry his burdens, working to prepare his dinner. And he's really got her isolated in this place. But he's treating her almost like, well, kind of like the mule that Nanny talks about early on in chapter 3. That passage on page 14 about black women being the mule of the world, carrying the load for their men. I don't know, there's something about this passage that makes me feel like Janie's being worked kind of like a mule and treated subhuman. He beats her for making a mistake at dinner. So to me, there's a lot going on here with her characterization as being this woman who's kept to the home and not even treated as fully human. Okay, so that's sort of what I see in terms of characterization. Let's take a look at the second thing that I picked up on in this passage, which is the blossom and pear tree imagery. So here's what I saw. She wasn't petal open, and then later in the next paragraph, she had no more blossoming openings dusting pollen over her man, nor any glistening young fruit where the petals used to be. Okay. We all vividly remember the pear tree of pages 10 and 11. It seems like that spring imagery is coming back, except spring is dead. She's not petal open. There's no more blossoms. There's no more pollen dust over him. There's no glistening young fruit. None of this sort of vitality and new life that she expected to come with her relationship with Jody, none of it's there anymore. And that seems like a huge shift. I'm thinking back to the chapter when she leaves Killick's and she's going off with Joe, that she sees Joe through the eyes of disappointment, right? The previous chapter ended with that her dreams were broken, so she became a woman. And that she decides to go off with Joe, and in going off with Joe, I think she expects that her life with him is going to be this sort of springtime pear tree experience. And what we see here is that it's not. There's no blossomy openings. There's no young fruit. So I see an absolute parallel, an absolute connection back to the pear tree on 10 and 11, and also back to the passage on 25. 25 is when she decides to leave Killick's. She knew things that nobody had ever told her about the trees and the wind and the falling seeds, right? She knew that marriage did not make love. Her first dream was dead, so she became a woman. When she finally sees Joe, she doesn't see him through the pollen dust, but she sees him through the eyes of disappointment. So it makes sense here that the petals are no longer open. The pollen dust is no longer there. The young fruit is no longer there glistening. Okay, so that was the second thing I noticed. The third thing was this extended metaphor, and I'll mark it out for you. She stood there until something fell off the shelf inside of her. Then she went inside there to see what it was. It was her image of Jody, tumbled down and shattered. But looking at it, she saw that it never was the flesh and blood figure of her dreams, but something she had grabbed up to drape her dreams over. In a way, she turned her back upon the image where it lay and looked further. Okay, so first of all, an extended metaphor we know is just a metaphor with lots of parts. So the sort of initial metaphor here is like Jody had tumbled off the pedestal that she'd put him on. Okay, so that gets extended. So instead of just being he tumbled off the pedestal is inside of her, like in her heart. And Jody is really an image, like a guy in a picture frame. And the picture frame has fallen, and the glass has broken, and it's just in total disrepair. But here's the critical part. Her dream wasn't Jody. He was just something to drape her dreams over. Like, I don't know, almost like a coat hook for her dreams. Janie, instead of trying to fix her tumbled down, broken Jody picture, decides to leave it where it is and look further. Okay, let's unpack this metaphor a little bit more. She notices this sort of sense inside of herself, and this is going to lead us to the last thing that I picked up on with double consciousness. She's aware of the inside of herself and goes there, like she's on the outside and opens the door to her inside and walks in and sees this broken image. She sees that she'd built Jody up into something that she wanted him to be, but that he himself wasn't actually her dream. He didn't actually fit what she wanted. He was just sort of this convenient thing to drape her dreams over. So there's this extended metaphor about sort of how she had placed Joe on a pedestal inside of the palace of her heart. So the last thing, and this leads us nicely to it, is double consciousness. So being aware of the inside and the outside of ourselves, of who we are on our interior and who we present to others. Look at this last passage. She found that she had a host of thoughts that she had never expressed to him, and numerous emotions she had never let Jody know about. Things packed up and put away in parts of her heart where he could never find them. She was saving up feelings for some man she had never seen. She had an inside and an outside now, and suddenly she knew how not to mix them. Okay, so she's packed up and put away things just for herself, and maybe for some man of her future. And I mentioned earlier, this sort of makes me wonder if this is going to be TK, because we saw his name mentioned in the opening chapter. But more importantly than that, she's aware of her interior self, and she's aware of the Janie that she presents to others. This makes me think, after that passage I talked about before about the speech making, Janie made her face laugh after a short pause. She was thinking about the exterior self, who other people see, and she made that person laugh, right? Same thing here. She knows who she presents to other people and who she actually is to herself, and she decides not to mix them. She decides to keep them separate. She'd rather be torn, she'd rather be divided, than to be petal open. Right? She'd rather be this split interior-exterior self than to be totally natural, vulnerable, and open. So, I see all these pieces to put together here. The nature and spring imagery, the extended metaphor, characterization, double consciousness. And I want you to start thinking about, how do all those four pieces fit together? And what does this mean for the character of Janie and this point in the novel, this turning point in the novel? What's the argument that's being made about Janie and about her journey?